I think for women, I think the biggest thing is to pay attention to is obviously the digestion, but the other component that's a really, really big component is your monthly cycle. Those things are always, from a hormonal standpoint, are causing fluid retention, the blow, again, some of those things can cause disruption in digestion too, with things like constipation, things like that, all of those factors. So it's important to kind of know why these things are taking place as far as seeing the scale fluctuate. So it's not something to overly stress about when you're seeing that. What I always I always recommend is kind of doing a weigh in from a multiple days. So ideally, I like to see at least a 5 day weigh in. As long as it doesn't affect you stress wise, that day-to-day stressor shouldn't accumulate to cause more stress by weighing yourself if you're doing yourself more injustice that way. But if you're able to kind of overcome that and have a better understanding of these variables that cause the problem, or at least cause the fluctuations with weight, you're able to have a better accuracy to have a predicted outcome in terms of the fluctuations. And over time, collecting those days that you're actually weighing yourself, you're going to have a better idea of what's happening, or at least how progress is going for you as far as on your program.
There was a couple things that I wanted to highlight really quick. As far as digestion, because obviously I know that you talked about digestion a lot, but like, what are some of the cofactors that would basically dictate whether or not you had poor digestion or really good digestion? Like, as an example, is fiber too high? Is fiber too low?
Well, I think if it's too low, you're going to run into issues with potential constipation, things like that. That's just going to cause a constant increase in your weight. If your fiber is too low, you're not eating enough veggies, things like that. But the opposite side of the spectrum is if your fiber is too high, usually I'll recommend about probably getting, around 30 grams is kind of the max. I think anything over 30, and that's individual specific, to be honest with you, but anything over 30, I don't think that it always warrants better benefits.
What about, let's say, as an example, in regards to like what I'm going to talk about, because a lot of the time when we have brand new clients that are starting up with us, if they're dieting, maybe they're in a fat loss phase or something like that, and we know that we are systematizing, we're planning in, periodizing these higher carbohydrate days and things like this. I've had oftentimes where a brand new client will email me freaking out because she gained a couple pounds overnight because we loaded her on like 300 grams of carbs. So can you talk a little bit about how that actually plays a role? And let's say, for instance, the transport of having those high carbs and what actually happens?
Those carbs, typically for a carbohydrate is going to be yielding about 2 to 3 grams of water weight per 1 gram of carb, right? So if you're looking at that from that standpoint, it's expected that your weight goes up. If your weight goes down after having that, probably can, for the next time you're going to have a refeed or any kind of increase in caloric intake from carbohydrate, probably have a little bit of room for improving the ceiling of carbohydrate consumption, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll go ahead and provide you guys kind of an awesome job, Gillis. I appreciate the response on that question. Everybody give Gillis a little round of applause there. So something that I want to talk about is like this from like a practical application perspective, okay? Because there's a couple things that Gillis actually talked about that I want to try to transition into real life clientele. So I've worked with a client who, when she emailed me, she sent me over her questionnaire. She was eating 100 to 120 grams of fiber a day. I'll let that marinate for a second, okay? 100 to 120 grams of fiber a day. And when she sent me her questionnaire, you guys know I asked for photos at the bottom. I saw her photos. She was a small gal, long distance running gal, like no muscle, 100 pounds, but her stomach was protruding out as if she was legitimately like halfway through a pregnancy. And I immediately asked her, I was like, how many grams of fiber are you eating? She was like, oh, this is my fiber intake. And she took it to the extreme for a long period of time. And she overconsumed fiber to the point where there was malabsorption of everything she was eating occurring. So you have to think, fiber takes up space in your gut and your large intestine. And if there's so much fiber taking up space in your large intestine, how can the fats, the carbohydrates, the vitamins and minerals, the proteins, how can all that stuff be absorbed? It can't. So therefore, she's not even absorbing all of these calories that she's eating because fiber is so high. Now, with somebody like that, she ended up having like an extreme eating disorder, which she didn't tell me about. But then once I found out about it a couple weeks into the thing, I immediately referred her out to a professional who could help with that. That's not my scope, okay? Now, if anybody here, if you guys are coach, you got to understand there are specific things that are not our scope of practice. If it's a psychological dislike, there's a lot of things that we as either, well, some of you are clients, some of you are coaches. There's specific things that we should just not think we're not Superman. We can do everything. There are a lot of things to where, hey, I got to refer somebody out. So maybe it's a good idea for me to seek a professional that does this for a living, create a relationship with that individual so that therefore, if I do come across one of these individuals, and that's not the only one time that's ever happened, but I can actually refer them out. The second thing that I want to talk about is actually addressing the amount of carbohydrate that your specific client or an individual is capable of metabolizing. So something that I've noticed when we get gals pretty darn lean, let's say for instance, if they want to do a fat loss phase, we're getting them down to a place where, you know, they're lean. They could potentially step on stage if they wanted to. What I notice is that the leaner the individuals are, the more insulin sensitive they are. It's almost like we can play around and load more carbohydrate than we normally would if they were carrying more adipose tissue. So just as an example, I'm working with a client in the UK right now. Her name's Kim. Some of you guys might follow her on Instagram. But before we actually did her mock bikini competition, the first high day I loaded her on, we went up to 300 grams of carbohydrates. Her metabolism responded super well. So then the second depletion, when we came back, we pushed up to 400. Metabolism responded really well. Third time we came back, pushed up to 450, still responded well. And then before, I believe it was a couple of days before the actual like show day, mock show day, we ended up getting up to, I think it was 900 grams of carbs over the course of 2 days, over the course of 48 hours. And she actually looked tighter after 900 grams of carbs. So just as an example, like what Gillis was talking about, did her weight go up? You bet your ass it did. But did she actually look more impressive? Because the tissues that were there could actually absorb the glycogen that we were putting in. Okay, so rule of thumb, there's a couple different applications there that I think are important. But I love your response, Gillis, and weight fluctuations, obviously, just to wrap it all up. Weight fluctuations are 100% normal, but the more that we know and the more that we understand what causes weight fluctuations, the better position not only ourselves as coaches and clients are in, but the better our client understands the process. So that way we don't get emails and people are freaking out. So, you know, and I've also had clients before that have came to me and they gain weight after a high day. They go to their coach in the gym and they're like, hey, bro, coach, I gained this much weight overnight. And the coach is like, just follow the plan. It's like, can you tell me why is the scale going up? No, just follow the plan. It's like, okay, well, if you're not leading with education, you're not on the same team as us. So we really have to make sure that we lead with education in everything that we do to essentially have all of our clients on the same page as us as coaches. All right.